She appeared to be a loving mom to an infant boy who had just entered the world. But authorities in Alabama say that couldn't be further from the truth because she is accused of killing that baby boy.
Call the same drive, call the same drive. I have an 8-month-old, possible full arrest now. Confirmed full arrest at the time.
10-4, you're got CPR in progress. EMS is on the scene as well.
Those are the shocking moments heard on dispatch in Alabama as they responded to a house for a child who, quote, showed no signs of life. The allegations in this story are shocking, but the mom who is accused in this story, she's answering to them on camera. I'll tell you what she just said as she made her way into court. This video per WAFF. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. These are the kind of stories that are really difficult to comprehend, and they're also really painful to listen to, but they're important. And that's why we cover them here on the case on Law&Crime. They're important because they happen all too often. And today we're talking about an alleged child abuse case out of Alabama that ended the life of a little boy. Let's get into it. Here's the victim in this story. His name is Jonah. He was a twin. He was just an infant. He was believed to be 8 months old, and he lost his life. And this is who police say he lost his life to, allegedly his own mother, a woman who appeared to be the kind of loving mom that we would all want for a newborn in this world. But then comes August 1st of this year. So not long ago, we're talking about something that happened just on Friday last week. In the early hours of the morning, just after midnight, deputies responded to Morgan Skye Thornton's house in Athens, Alabama. It's not far from Huntsville. And here are those terrifying moments that you never want to hear on police dispatch of what EMS has to respond to. This is per WZDX TV.
Call the same drive, call the same drive. I have an 8-month-old, possible full arrest now. Confirmed full arrest at the time.
10-4, you're got CPR in progress. EMS is on the scene as well.
Inside the home, the Limestone County Sheriff's Office says they found the baby with, quote, no signs of life. And they say that young 8-month-old Jonah was the victim of a, quote, brutal assault, allegedly by his own mom. Law enforcement said it didn't take long to figure out that they would be charging Morgan Thornton, the mom, in this case. Now, even though Jonah showed no signs of life, their words, when deputies arrived, they rushed him to the hospital because they were able to get that child a pulse. Now, while he was fighting for his life, deputies took a blood sample from Thornton and they say she seemed drunk. It appears this mom does have a history of alleged alcohol abuse. Just last month, Thornton pleaded guilty to assault in the 2nd degree. And according to WAFF, that was related to her kicking a police officer in the, quote, crotch area. Now, the same day that happened, she had been arrested for driving under the influence, putting her child at serious risk of injury. It is unclear which child was the one involved in that case. She also was charged with domestic violence and disorderly conduct for allegedly hitting a man in the head. But in the case we're talking about today, when Jonah was rushed to the hospital with that pulse, deputies say Thornton was charged with aggravated child abuse. But then this story gets even sadder because that is when young Jonah passed away not long after he got to the hospital fighting for a chance at life. The charges against his mom, now that her son was dead, they have been upgraded and she is now facing capital murder, which means that the death penalty could come into play in this case if she's found guilty. But Thornton is denying that she had anything to do with the death of her son. Thornton spoke to a reporter with WAFF-TV about what she's accused of. She was being led into the courthouse to make her initial court appearance. She's in a jail jumpsuit. She's got cuffs on. But here is what she said while she was walking to the courthouse ahead of that appearance. Listen.
I put my son to bed. I swaddled him and put him to bed at 7 o'clock. And then...
Do you remember anything after that?
In court, Thornton also told the judge that she didn't understand when she was told what she was facing charges for allegedly killing Jonah per WAFF. But this woman who identifies herself as the aunt of Jonah's father had this to say on Facebook, quote, beautiful, sweet baby boy whose precious life was taken by the hands of his own mother, Morgan Thornton. Evil, sick, twisted witch. I want her court-ordered to drop our family name upon their divorce. And then she goes further, firing back at what you just heard in this news clip. She writes, quote, she lied on that video. She said she put Jonah to bed at 7 and she didn't remember anything after that. She went in there and woke my nephew up and told him to, quote, come look at what she did to this demon. She also said that she tried to give him CPR and she did not. My nephew did. No amount of alcohol could cause you to hallucinate to that degree, my opinion. She was either on something my nephew didn't know about or just ate up with evil, or the combo. Now this is the last post that Thornton had on her Facebook page. It is from the day before she allegedly killed her own son in her home. It appears that she and her family were in Nashville for a trip and about to fly back home, and there are several pics with the caption, quote, finding a way to cool off at the Nashville airport. What her fate will be because of what happened over the next several hours since that post is now in the hands of the legal system, as she is now facing that count of capital murder. Hey, before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I need to take a moment and talk to you a little bit about our partners at Morgan & Morgan. We're talking about America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and a history of winning. Frankly, they win a lot. They've recovered more than $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. And in just the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. And another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Now, even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can see here, you can do it with just 8 easy clicks on your phone. So if you've been hurt, you need to start a claim. Go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. Join us now, an attorney licensed in Alabama. John Phillips is a victim rights attorney. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know this is an incredibly sad case. It always is. Unfortunately, we cover too many of these. But in this case, you have the mom, Morgan Thornton. It stood out to me that her defense, it appears to this point, is that she doesn't remember anything. And she puts the baby down, and then she's told that her baby has been hurt, and then the baby passes away at the hospital. What do you make of that defense?
Right. So normally you see criminal defendants with the Fifth Amendment privilege, and they don't say anything, and we really don't get to know other than what they may have told police or prosecutors in the beginning. But here, Ms. Thornton spoke to media. She was leaving the courthouse and spoke to the judge a little bit, expressing bewilderment and kind of not knowing what happened. But police reports say that she was found drunk with this baby they tried to perform CPR on. And, her last story was that she was swaddling the baby, put the baby to bed, and then now she just doesn't know what happened. Which, obviously police and prosecutors tend to believe a different story.
Because we've seen in certain murder cases that defense before. I have no idea how this person wound up dead. I mean, how effective in the court of law is the I don't remember defense?
Well, there's different layers of it, right? So you could be too drunk to have the mens rea to commit a crime. I don't think that's really the case here. You could have some level of alcohol or mental illness going to that 0.5% of insanity, cases that we see. I don't really see that here, but criminal defendants have to say something, right? And what you can tell from Ms. Thornton is she has a very recent but long time history of DUIs. I think there was one in which a child was in the car because they also referenced child endangerment, assaults, public intoxication. So, when you have somebody that for all intents and purposes appears to have alcoholism or drug addiction or that sort of thing, I don't think you have to jump to the conclusion that they're lying when they say they don't remember, because I doubt she remembers a lot of her life. But when you commit to raise a child, you can't live that life, or you're responsible for all the bad that comes from it.
And of those recent incidents that she had, reportedly one of them was she kicked a police officer in the quote crotch area, and that's I'm sure in Alabama, as much as anywhere, that's not looked kindly upon by the state and by prosecutors for sure. This is a capital murder case. What is the bar in Alabama for a case to be considered capital murder?
Yeah, this one kind of surprised me as a capital murder, but prosecutors are aggressive in Alabama and kind of charge top down. But most people think of capital murder as premeditated. You thought about killing somebody, you enacted a plan, or something that was a part of another crime, a rape that resulted in murder, that level of thing. Here it's not one that you would immediately suspect is capital murder, or first degree murder. It almost, just on the surface facts, looks like a second or manslaughter case, because you had a drunk parent who over swaddled or whatever. But we don't know what we don't know yet either. I suspect there's going to be forensic photography and opinions that show that there was a lot more that happened to her son Jonah. And but this isn't one that you would normally expect first degree murder, or particularly capital punishment, to be the charge right off the bat.
Right, because on one hand, you have the history, and then I know police had said that young Jonah, I mean, it's awful to think about. They say that he was beaten severely, were their terms of when he was brought to the hospital. But then, when you think of capital punishment, the death penalty, I mean, that's the highest level of punishment, obviously, that you can give a defendant. How aggressive is Alabama when it comes to pursuing capital punishment in cases involving a charge of capital murder?
Alabama's very aggressive. And another thing to consider here is kind of the next step in the process. And I know we were going to talk about this, but the next step in the process typically is what's called an Anias hearing. And Anias hearings are named after Anaya Blanchard. And Anaya Blanchard was a young girl who I think went to Auburn University, who was murdered. And Anaya Blanchard's stepdad is Walt Harris, who was, a UFC heavyweight fighter. And I've met with their family. I know their family. Walt is a good friend. And the alleged murderer, was out on bond and, found another victim in Anaya. And so Alabama unanimously elected and passed Anaya's law. And so there's Anaya's law hearings to determine whether Miss Thornton should ever see the light of day for purposes of bond, or if they're going to hold her over. And, it's why you see some of these cases charged as high as possible to begin with, to trigger that system so that they don't have people who, have killed others, particularly their own children, out on the streets to do more crime.
Yeah, because she does have, I mean, to your point, like a pattern, and it's not just a DUI. It was a DUI where a kid was in the car, and we don't know. Jonah was a twin, and I believe she has, just from Facebook pictures, other children as well. So it's unclear which child was in the car when all of that allegedly took place. How likely is it, even through, like, what does the hearing go through? Like, what is an Anaya's hearing actually like? What will they look at in her situation when she faces a judge for it?
It's y'all have aired bond hearings before, I believe, and it's kind of a bond hearing on steroids. And the point of it is, the main point of Anaya's hearing is to not give, bonds guaranteed, bail's guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. You have a right to be on the outside because you're innocent until proven guilty. And what Anaya's law said is, wait, not on these capital crimes, not on these serious crimes where another person was seriously harmed or killed. And so they're going to look at her criminal history. They're going to look at, the nature of the facts and what they expect the evidence to prove. They don't have to prove the case, but, prove that this is, a substantial likelihood that she's the person, and that she would be a threat to society, essentially.
Because if she's accused of severely beating her son, I mean, what's the likelihood that she would even be granted bond once she has this hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one that even if there wasn't Anaya's law, that any other state would hold her over. But because the level of bad decision making and crimes in her past, plus the clear, signs of alcoholism or addiction, this isn't somebody that you want running around in society anyway. And courts are obligated to both the Constitution and allowing people the cloak of innocence and to be able to prepare with their attorneys on the outside, but also protect the public. Because if Anaya's alleged killer had actually been held over like most demanded that he be, he'd have never run into Anaya. And so that's, you never want to be the person who the law is named after, right? It's usually horrible, horrible circumstances, and good for the Blanchard and Harris family to fight for others.
And part of the job, I'm sure it's really tough. Whether it was talking with the Blanchard family or other families who have been through incredible tragedy and loss, and in this case, it's a mom who is accused of killing her own child. And like, I look at her Facebook page, and you would think she was the most loving mother you would ever see on the face of the earth, and yet here she is. You see the mugshot and everything that police are saying, the reality of what actually took place in their opinion. And how do you make sense of some of these cases for people trying to understand how all of this stuff can happen?
What gets me here, and I talked to a guy yesterday who was just around my house doing some repair work. And he talked about how he was 3 years or 6 years sober. And I was like, what was the impetus of that? What caused you to realize you have a problem? And I mean, the guy's just doing handiwork. He has no reason to tell me all this, but what made you get into recovery? And he was like, John, I had multiple DUIs and I was a threat to myself and others. And unfortunately, it sometimes takes harming somebody else for an alcoholic or drug addict to get help. And how many chances did Thornton have before this, right? And that's the most horrible part of doing what I do representing victims is we'll see DUI crashes where there's been, DUI after DUI. And, the person I talked to yesterday was on his fifth. And I'm like, how many chances do you get,
Right.
to potentially kill somebody? And the level of narcissism or deflection or manipulation or denial comes with the disease of alcoholism. It's protecting the person, and so it's just an awful state.
Yeah, because I think in this case, I mean, if you have doctors, there's all, and I feel like we see a lot of cases where like the medical examiner knows way more than a defendant thinks the medical examiner knows. And so here she is on a perp walk being like, I just put the baby to bed. And it's like, this wasn't just clearly they can see something happen, to use the phrase severely beaten. The alcoholism part of it, I think too, is interesting because if they have the forensic evidence to convict Morgan Thornton, and if you're a defense attorney trying to defend this case, and for so many people, and it's true, it impacts everybody's, so many families, it's impacted my family, where you can say like someone has a issue and it's alcoholism. But then at the same time, like in this case, I think it'd be hard for a jury to see that as an excuse, even if she doesn't remember anything that happened. But I mean, what is the defense's strategy here if this actually gets to trial?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got to try to pursue, either destruction of mens rea or motive, or some level of serial alcoholism, to not necessarily get away with it, but to reduce the sentence. To try to make this a non-capital crime or reach a plea offer. But assuming and I don't really think it's a wild assumption, but assuming that prosecutors are going to be able to show, numerous bruises, tears in the skin, tears in the structures of the body, broken bones, some level of trauma to this child coinciding with that night or leading up to, that night. This is almost unavoidable.
How common is it that you see prosecutors in Alabama, they go with the capital murder charge, just potentially to make sure that she doesn't get out on bond, and then you see it brought to a first degree or a second degree murder?
It happens. You always want to start with the highest, even in negotiations and plea bargains, if you can start high and kind of range in the middle, you want that gap to be as much as possible. But here, I think they're gonna try to pin the capital murder, the first degree kind of elements on abuse, because it's not like she has to spend, an overnight planning how she's going to kill her child. Once you start inflicting wounds, by the time you've inflicted a fatal wound, is enough time to premeditate, and have plus the felony murder rule as well, of child abuse and significant child abuse. Either way, they've got that first degree range and potentially capital range. It's just, you don't hear about, I think they what was it that they called the chair in Alabama, the yellow hammer or something. And you don't hear about many women facing the death penalty and getting the death penalty. It's just kind of how it works. But, to have that as a hammer, and I know Alabama's, more an injection state now, but it's serious. And you also want a message to other parents, other people dealing with addiction issues, that this is not okay. This will not be tolerated in Alabama or anywhere in the United States.
Is the bar, or what is the bar where it's, because I think in the other state that you practice in Florida, someone will be convicted of murder and then becomes the sentencing part of it, where it's almost like a whole, I wouldn't say a new trial, but like you're arguing whether or not this person should get the death penalty. In Alabama, what is the difference between being a first degree murder and then a capital murder case, where either way, if you're convicted, you're going to not spend any time for the rest of your life outside of prison? But in one case, I assume that you may, obviously, understand you're on death row.
Right. I mean, and you can have a capital case like we had one in Florida that was a capital case. The person actually sexually assaulted his niece and then dismembered her body. And I am, from attending the University of Alabama with Professor John Smikla, he changed me from being pro capital punishment to death penalty to kind of being, more reasonable and saying, well, if the state gets it wrong, all of the costs, everything, like maybe not, I'm not so much a death penalty case guy. That one, where this guy raped and dismembered his niece by marriage, was when I was like, yeah, like, go ahead. Like, right. This is as serious as it gets. Here, I don't see her getting the death penalty. I don't even know that that'll be something that the jury instructions, allow the jury to do here. I have a feeling they'll come off. It's a huge trade point of, well, we won't seek the death penalty if, blah, 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 blah. But, most states have a bifurcated procedure where, you find the person guilty, and then determine, whether this is a capital punishment crime, that significant. I haven't looked at it in Alabama in the last several years, and it always changes. So I'm not positive exactly what their procedure is.
Yeah, and just such a sad case, and we'll see how it plays out. Always great to have you, John Phillips. Thank you for joining us on Law and Crime, as always.
Thank you so much.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.